The value chain diagram we were doing yesterday, just trying to make it more compact so it fits on the screen. Yeah, some things to note. Something very important that I forgot to mention yesterday is the price. Okay, we have to revenue. There are two main things. One of them is how much we're going to produce. Remember here also I decide. Okay, there is some, because it depends on the reservoir, that's correct, how much I can produce from each well and for how long I will be producing. But I also decide when, for example, each well will enter in operation and when I will start production, more or less. Is it going to be year 7, year 8, year 10? That's something I decide. So that's why I put here some production schedule. But usually we try to make it as soon as possible. And one thing schedule. One thing I forgot was the oil price. That's a very important input. That's how you calculate the revenue, the gas price, the LNG. And we will see later, but usually that number is either a fixed number, so you assume it will be 60 for the whole life of the project, or it's a number adjusted by inflation. Every year this 60, you increase it by inflation. The gas price is, like I said, usually is a contract you make, and that contract, for example, at this particular point in time, you negotiate a value, but then maybe in the future, 5 years from now, the gas price drops dramatically, and then you made a very bad deal, okay? Or then maybe increase dramatically, and you know, those are the risks we have in the projects. So, but keep in mind that that's something very important, and I'm going to discuss a bit more on that. But for now, people say, for example, for oil, I say I make my calculations based on a $40 per barrel, $60 per barrel, and then I make some sensitivity how the value of my project changes with that number. Okay. Yes, the value, the level of detail, here I put like all the technical things, all the technical aspects of a project, okay? But the value, the level of detail depends where you are in the project. If you are in the early phase, you really have gathered just seismic, not anything, no exploration, nothing, and you want to make a reserve estimation, really you don't have anything else, okay? Just to calculate value, you just have to multiply that reserve that I have, that amount that I can recover, I just multiply by the oil price, okay? And then I say, well, by experience in my company, these type of projects usually have the price tag of $1 billion or something, and then I find with that a compound economical value, okay? When I start progressing further, I get more information, I can start populate my model, how I'm going to develop it, which kind of a system I'm going to use, how many wells I need. Then everything start to materialize, and then I can make more complex calculations, okay? But initially it might be that I don't have any of those. I don't have a clear image how the reservoir looks like. I don't have a clear image how many wells I'm going to need. So it's just a very rough estimate, okay? But remember, we do that in decision gate 0, right? We have to decide if we're going to go forward after the discovery, forward with the project or not. So let's put that comment here, down here, that the level of detail of the value chain depends on where the project is, okay? Not where, but when on the phase of the project, okay? Early phase, we don't have that many details. Late phase, everything is very clear, and I have a lot of information. Another thing is that, you know, if you look here, we have many variables that we have. It's not that we have one unique number that we can trust, okay, but we might have a range, okay? For example, reservoir, let's say rock properties, porosity, we might not have a unique value. We usually have a distribution. We have a minimum and a maximum value, okay? We have here porosity max, porosity mean, the same thing with permeability. Okay, the same thing with the extension. We're not sure if it's, some square kilometers, or maybe we have a bit more, a bit less. Yeah. And then we have some things, so these are, in a way, you could say, if we look, for example, at porosity, we can say porosity is a continuous variable, right? We say, well, it's something that can be between this minimum and this maximum, where we are not sure, but it's bounded, and it can be done continuous between these two. But there are some things that are like integer. They are not continuous variables. They are just one option or the other. For example, the offshore structure, I can choose it to be a platform. I can be a semi-submersible. Can be a FPSO. So I have integer options. I have is either one or the other. I have no continuous thing in between. And you will see that causes this mix of these two things, and I have that all around the process. Okay, the schedule also, I decide to produce this year or that year. I decide to install the platform this year or that year. It's also in a way like what I call it, an integer decision variable. And when we have a mix of these, it becomes really complex to try to quantify, really what is the economic value of the project. Okay, like usually, for example, the capex, okay, capital expenditures usually look like that. Okay, you can define a probability. Here you have, and you have one mean value. That's the one that you use. For example, you have a capex 1. Okay, you think that the facility and everything is going to cost, I don't know, $1 billion. Okay, but in reality, that's a distribution. You might have, it might be that it will be, there is a, I don't know, 80% or 20% probability it will be higher, or there will be some probability that it will be lower. Okay, and the thing is that when you progress in the project, this distribution, the idea is that it will become narrower and narrower after you have defined already what is exactly all the design features of your platform, okay, of your facilities. Initially, you have no idea if you want to process, how much water will come, what kind of water processing requirements you need, gas processing requirements. You don't know if you will have gas lift or not. So in reality, it is very wide. Well, it might be that you are around this number, but you don't know. It might be plus minus 40%. Okay, if you need a very processing, you are going to get a lot of water, then you need a very big water processing train. It will be more costly. Okay, maybe you don't need that, and then it will be less costly. It will be less expensive. But as you progress in time, so this is, let's put it here, that will be at time 0, and then that will be at time 1. Okay, which is later in time, maybe 3 years into the project. You have already talked to the companies that make the topside. You have already refined the cost values, and finally, you're getting less uncertainty. And usually during the project, I don't remember exactly, but you have, I think you have to reduce the uncertainty of the cost by some number, and I think the lowest you can get is 20%. Okay, so we say at the initial stage, the value of capex can be very well plus minus 60% or plus minus 40%. Okay, and at the end I try to reduce it at the later stage. It's not that it disappears. Okay, I always have a very big uncertainty. I will know the final value after this if it's completely installed, delivered and installed. Okay, but usually at a later stage I can reduce it maybe down to plus minus 20%. So it becomes narrow, that distribution. That clear? And we want to okay, so let's so this is like, I'm going to put it here maybe with some highlight. Okay, this is the main decision variable or parameters I use to define in each decision gate. There might be other things, okay, like I told you, political considerations, if it's an area that I know if the political regime is stable or not, if it's a sensible area, environmental area that has a lot of opposition by Greenpeace or by the government or by someone. But if you're looking at only the technical part, okay, first, if there is any big technological blocker to develop my field, I have a very big problem that for example, long transportation distance, or is very remote, or to transport the people, it will take a long trip by helicopter and boat. But if all of that looks okay, right, then the main factor that I use is just the economy, okay, how healthy the project looks like, okay, how robust it looks like. So these are two of the factors I use: net present value and internal rate of return, that I use to compare different alternatives. Okay, so the process roughly is let's say the field development or concept evaluation process, okay, usually consists on, first, like I told you before, identify development scenarios. Okay, I have to identify how many things I have in each box. It might be that the reservoir, with the data you have, well, it might be that my reservoir is like that, one block. It might be that it's 2 blocks. It might be that it's a region with low permeability, high permeability. It might be that it has an aquifer. So I might have different options in my head for the reservoir. Okay, the same thing for all the other things, for the offshore structure, for the facilities, etc. So at first I have to identify all the scenarios. Okay, and okay, development scenarios and I would say alternatives, okay, for each box. Okay, and remember, some of them I can decide, like here, I can decide what to use. Some of them are things that I cannot control, okay, like the reservoir. Then I have to perform a pre-design of each scenario. Okay, because I have to get enough information such that I can populate the cost. Okay, I have to know how big, what is the water depth, what is the weight that this structure will have, how many wells I'm going to need to drain the reservoir. So I have to make a very even primitive, but I have to make a pre-design. Okay, and then I have to study and compute the economic value of each scenario, and compute of each scenario. Okay, and this is the tricky part. Again, we are going to do a very simple example, but that's the tricky part. Study and compute the value of each scenario, and then you compare each scenario and choose the best option. Okay, for example, you make it, well, I assume I have a platform, then I calculate my NPV, I calculate the semi-sub, calculate NPV and FPSO NPV, and then I choose just the one that has the highest, okay, in a simple way. Yes?
You also count for uncertainty in this?
Yep. So the way that you account for uncertainty, okay, is that you perform the simplest way is I use something called sensitivity analysis. Okay, and that's Don't think that the oil industry, some companies, they have very advanced workflows, how to quantify uncertainty. But most of them, they just use this sensitivity analysis. And this is based on a principle called ceteris. Anyone here speaks Latin? Ceteris paribus. Okay? That means all other things the same. Okay, you're going to change just one thing and see how that affects the final number. Okay? All other the same. Okay, and it's very simple. For example, you want to know how capex will affect. Okay, so you have capex, as I mentioned before. You have capex 1, but that might be between a capex min max and a capex min. Just because that's the uncertainty, right? So you perform 3 runs. You perform 1 with capex base, 1 with capex max, and 1 with capex mix, leaving everything else the same, unchanged. Okay, and then you do other analysis. For example, you can make the oil price. Okay, you have an oil price base, but then you have oil price max, and oil price min. But at the same time, you leave the capex in 1. It's not like you're mixing max with max, min with min. You're leaving all the others have to be in the base case. For example, porosity, also between min and max. Okay. Yes. And the way to visualize, so you will see, we are going to talk now, it's not exactly ideal, right? Because you're missing a lot of cases where you might have the combination of 1 max and 1 min, and they have completely different effect, okay, on the NPV. So this is not the ideal way. So I'm going to show you, but it's complex, okay? It's complex to make it. So there are this sensitivity analysis. There are usually several ways we can present it, but one of the typical ways I present these results. Okay, so I will say yeah, I think I tried to do it. So it will be NPV base, right? NPV max and NPV min. Okay, and then I make variations. For example, oil price plus minus 20%. Okay, capex plus minus 20%. The TRR, for example, plus minus 20%. Okay, and I obtain for each one of them, that will be the base, max, and min. Yes, I put that on a table. And remember, for each one of them, I have to go and run again. If I change, for example, the capex, I have to run again all my economic evaluation. Okay, if I change the size of the reservoir, then I have to run again the production profile, and then I have to again calculate. So each one of them involves, maybe it's a simple process, just changing a number in this evaluation, but maybe it's a big process. I have to change a number, then I have to change a model, and then I have to change calculation of a production profile, and finally I change the NPV. Okay, so it might be something that is very simple, but also something that takes longer time. So after I have that, I can use a tornado chart that you will have to do now in your exercise. Tornado chart. Okay, that's one option to present this data, and that's at least in Norway what people use. And you have the NPV base here. You have one x-axis at the bottom, and here you have is very positive, and here is very negative. And then you say, well, what will happen if with the oil price? This will be the first line with the oil price. If the oil price, well, my base case, let's say is $40 per barrel. Okay, what happens if now it's 80? Okay, and then I get a range how it will be. Okay, and if what happens if now, so this will be 80, and this now will be, for example, 20. Okay, and maybe this is positive, but at some point here I have the 0 and it starts getting negative. Yes, that means that that project at $20 per barrel is not economic. Okay, it's not it's not going to be economic. And you do the same capex, for example. Just no surprise, the big change or one of the most the factors that affect the most is the oil price. Okay, and you will see that in almost any project. Capex, the same thing. For example, capex, you have here it's, I don't know, 1 billion NOK, and here you have, I don't know, 0.6 million NOK, and here you have 1.5 billion NOK. Okay, and so forth. And let's see, I think let's see. Goliath, for example, that's a field in the up north. It's close to the Snow White field. And you see, that's what I told you. The company, they submit the PDO, the Plan for Development and Operation, to the government, and the government then, the NPD, makes like their own version, a summarized version, to present it to the parliament. And then the parliament, with that summary, they try to make a decision. They take the final decision. Okay, so here they explain how they're going to. Okay, now it should be someplace here, the economy. And it's not here. It's making me look bad. Economy for projektet. Let's see. Okay. Okay, sensitivity analysis for the project. So you have, in this case, investing, that will be the capex, or the total amount that I have to pay for the project. What happens is, here you see the NPV before tax, okay, in billion NOK. So you see what is the variation of, it gives you from 10 to negative. If for any reason my project, the capex ends up, ends up being 20% more expensive, then I will have a negative value that will impact negatively. The oil price, this is in the, it will be 13.1. I'm not sure what value they use here, 400 NOK per barrel. So that's a very simple, and you say, well, it's very primitive, but that's what the industry is using. So, okay, so we will see how maybe you are, new engineers, new blood coming into the industry, and you will make improvements. And some companies are trying to make, something different. But basically, ceteris paribus. Okay, I keep everything else the same, and I start to change all the others, and then I see how that affects my NPV. Okay, so we have, that's one option. Okay, that's very primitive. Then you have also that something also the industry is using to study the effect of non-continuous variables. Okay, that they can be decision, different how do you say, different options, different options. Okay, like I told you, the type of platform that you have, or a decision that's something that is either option A, option B, is not something continuous. For that, people use also something that we are going to cover also here in class, called decision trees. Okay, and decision trees, the problem is that it converts everything to an integer variable. Okay, it converts everything. So even the continuous, you have to put it in a. So for example, decision trees look a bit like that. I forgot now but you have to make first also let's say that you have three variables, right? You have the size of the reserve, okay, TRR, okay, you have the capex, right? And then you have the development concept. Okay, that might be, for example, three things that you're going to get an exercise. FPSO, you have a platform, and you have a semi-sub. You have all of these options, these three options, and then you have associated a capex, which I told you looks something like this, right? And then a total recoverable reserves that also looks a bit like that, okay? And we are going to learn here in class how to make that. But the thing is that this is integer, okay? This is either one option or the other, but these are not. So I have to convert this capex in only an integer or an integer number of options. I have to convert that capex, which is a continuous distribution, to a very defined number of options. And for example, usually I might choose 3, capex 1, and that has an associated probability of occurrence, okay, let's say 20%. Then I get capex 2, then again 60%, and then capex 3, and then I get 20%. And I have to do the same, convert that continuous function into an integer distribution. TRR1, 2, okay. Again, let's say 30. These numbers are just from the top of my head, okay? And then 20%. And after I have everything is integer, everything is divided in options, I can start making the tree, okay, and evaluate each branch. And I start first with the things I can decide, okay, and decision, that's what I don't remember. I think it's, anybody remembers circle or square?
For what?
For decision variables? Squared, I think. No? Well, we have to check. I will check it, but usually you use that symbol to say it's something that I decide on. I, the user, I decide. And I decide if it's going to be FPSO, if it's going to be a platform, if it's going to be, and it's very visual, okay, something that is still on use, very semi-sub. And inside each one of these options you have 3 capex, okay, that this I cannot decide, is a chance. Okay, it's a chance that I will get 1 billion or 1.4 or 0.9. So this is a chance, that's why it's round. And I didn't make enough space for this tree, sorry. Okay, this is the so that we call the level of the, let's say, the development option. That's one level, okay. Then I have the other level, which is the capex, that I have 3 options, and then inside each capex I have 3 revenues, which are the total recoverable reserves. Let me put that back. I'm sorry, you're probably making a mess on your notes, so I apologize, but nothing to do. Okay, and you have in each one of these capex 3 options. Okay. And you see here we are using only 3 variables. So one of the problems with these trees is that it can grow dramatically the size. You have 3 variables, you have 3 options in each one of them, so you have at the end how many options? 27, right? 3 times 3 times 3. You have to make a combination of all of them. So at the end you're going to get here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way until 27. And then you have to get a number. Here you have to get an NPV. You can make a very simple calculation of the revenue and the expenses, okay, for each option, and then you can get an NPV, and then you can say, well, which option is the best according to these 3. Okay. that's a way to, to deal with these integer option variables that are not continuous, but it's very, it can explode dramatically. I have to make many combinations, okay? But it's a way to take decisions. Also, to drill wells, to make more appraisal. This is very much used for when you're selecting the completion, when you are deciding if to drill or not a well. Okay, that's what we use. And there is a third option that we are going to discuss here. There might be many different mutations, etc. So let's say that we say number 1, and that's what the industry is using. Number 2, some companies they use it for different purpose, and 3 is that I perform a probabilistic analysis. And that is basically, if you see, like, I have a function, okay? Here I have a function that, let's say, depends on a variable x, okay? And that's going to give me y, and it's has an input x. This is a deterministic process. Deterministic, I say, if I have one value of x, that's going to give me y, right? Then I have another value of x, that's going to give me again y1. So deterministic, okay, I don't get, it's not like I get a range of y's. I get just one number, because it's either an NPV calculation, a profile calculation. It's an equation, okay, something that can be reproducible no matter how many times I make the calculation. If the input is fixed, I'm always going to get the same result, unless I have a bug, right, on the computer. Something has it happened to you in MATLAB? You get the same input gives you different result? No. The computers don't make mistakes, okay? But now what happens if this x is in a range, okay? It's a minimum and a maximum, okay? Has a distribution, okay? Let's say that we has something like that, like the capex. So how I'm going to quantify how y is going to look like? And ideally, I would like y also to exhibit the same type of distribution, right? Because then I don't have one unique value for the project, but actually have a range how the project can. If I go further here, well, it's less likely, okay, it's less probable that my project will have a very high value like is stated here, okay? But there is also a very low, it's very less likely, but it's likely, okay, that I will have a very low value. But I want to know how it is spread, okay? If my project looks, let's say that this is 0 someplace here, okay, and my project looks like that, then you say, well, it's very likely for these are all the possible ways, all the possible NPVs my project can take, right? My project can take all of that distribution, but most of them, let's say maybe this corresponds to 80%, will be on the positive side, yes? And then that helps me very much to take a decision. I say, well, I like this project very, very much, okay? But it might happen also that it's not like that, but it's something like this, okay? Where a big chunk of it will be negative. And by any chance, for example, maybe if I don't make that analysis, I just take one number here, I fall here on the right side of the 0, and then I take the decision this is profitable, and then surprise surprise, my project has negative value. So that's why I would like to get distribution to know, first what is the likelihood of getting a positive number, and then also something else is the spread of the distribution. Okay, one thing is where is it shifted, okay, where is the center, and the other thing is the spread. As I told you, okay, if we have something like that, the 0 is here or here, well, you have a very big spread, okay? But if you advance in time, or, well, is very likely that my project, will be positive, for example. And for that we have different methods. They're usually I'm not sure if to enter into that, but we have, it's called Monte Carlo. That's what we are going to discuss here in class, Monte Carlo method, that tries to create with the input, if you get the distribution of the input, it tries to create that distribution at the output. Yes? And basically, I'm going to discuss it later, okay, maybe next week, I think next week. But let me just explain very briefly what it consists on. You have a distribution here. Let's say you have this distribution, right? And Monte Carlo relies on taking random values of this distribution. Okay, I'm going to take 1 point here, and then I run, calculate NPV, and it gives me an NPV, for example, here. Okay, that's NPV, and that's the value of X. Then I run, take another number, and then maybe it might give me here. Then take another number, then I might give it here. And then I repeat that, at least the numbers are, for one variable it might be 8,000 iterations, 8,000 times, 8,000 random samples I can take from this distribution. Okay, and at the end that's going to draw this shape. That's going to draw that shape, and that's going to tell you how spread it is, how okay. And I ask you now, is the shape of this, then that defines that the shape of the output is going to be the same or not?
It depends on the function.
It depends on the function. For example, if I say here inside this function, I say a function that if x is greater than 100, then y is 1, or if x is, sorry. Okay, if I have, just imagine if my function, just to make it very simple, imagine if my function is a conditional. Okay, if x is greater than 100, then y will be 1. If x is less equal than 100, then y will be 0. A binary function. And then doesn't matter how is the sampling, how detailed it is. I run 1,000,000 iterations here. What I'm going to get? What am I going to get? Just 1 point here and just 1 point here. Okay, 1 point in 0 and 1 point in 1. Nothing else. Okay, so it depends on the shape of the function, not only on the distribution of the inlet parameters. Yeah, let's take a break. That clear? Any question before you go and relax? Yes?
Yeah, just curious, is there any like minimum probability that is normally used in the industry where they will decide to go through with the project? Like for example, 60%?
We will see that later. Okay, not on the context, and this is not done usually for NPV. Okay, this is done for calculating, and that's the example we are going to do next week, is for TRR. Okay, and TRR will define how they go forward or not. But this is not usually done for NPV, because one of the challenges is that you have to run this 1 million times or 8,000 times. And what is the problem there? Usually, when you do this sensitivity analysis, you have one guy here that says, well, change this number, right? This capex. Then you have to send it to another department, and then they take maybe 3 days, something, and then finally they give you the NPV. Imagine you have to do it for 8,000 times. Okay? You will never finish. Okay? So you have to have, that's why the industry now is so concerned about going everything digital. Because if you manage to put all of that workflow somehow digital, that you don't need too much the input a person in each one of these boxes, you set up the model, you make it automatic, then you can leave it running overnight, and then you come back and you say, oh, that's my distribution. But the way it is now, you have to go, maybe you have to go to the office, to the desktop of the guy and say, please, now, if I change this by 20%, what will be the NPV? You cannot tell it 8,000 times, he will quit. Okay, guy, no, I get crazy. I will be, doing that until I get old. So that's one of the challenges, and that's why usually we don't do that in the calculation of NPV. Okay, but at TRR we do it, and we will cover that next class. Okay, so let's take now 15 minutes break, and we come for the second part of the lecture. Okay, let's continue. So this method, I think the name of the guy was yeah, it's called Ulam, and has a Nicholas and Ulam Stanislas. That was the main inventor of this method, and he was working, I think, in Los Alamos, working for. So it's I think it's Stanislaw. I'm not sure, Stanislaw Ulam, and he was from Los Alamos lab. Okay, when they were doing the testing of the nuclear, atomic bomb, etc. And you got the idea. We are going to have next week a discussion on that, but you got the idea. It's taking a random variable from that distribution. You make the calculation and you obtain 1 point. Then you make another random number, make the calculation, another point. And you have to repeat that if you have a multi-variable function, that is the case of NPV, you have something that depends on x1, x2, x3. So you have to have a distribution for each one of them. Okay, for example, and then you get one number. In our case, we can get 2, right? We can get the NPV, for example, and then we can get y2. So we have to make a random sampling between all of these functions. And they might have look different. For example, this function indicates that every value between the minimum and the maximum has the same probability. Okay, this function indicates that around this number is more likely to occur, and then if you go outside or far away, then it's less likely to occur. Okay, but you might have different, and if you don't have this, you get usually when you have enough information, or when it's already like standard. Capex, for example, usually uses that kind of distribution. Okay, but some other parameters, porosity, if you have no better indication, well, you say it's just the same. All of them have the same likelihood. Okay, from minimum to maximum. You might have something that looks like that. You have all kind of different options. So you have to take, remember, a random number here, a random number here, a random number here, and let's put one more. A random number here. Okay, and then you compute 1 point here. And then you have to repeat one random point number there, and you repeat 1,000 times, 8,000 times, 1,000,000 times, depending on the function, depending on the input, depending on the range.
Is there like an optimized way of knowing how many iterations we should?
You can we are going to cover that also next week. There is a method that with the standard deviation of the final distribution, you can estimate how many iterations you need. Okay, but we are going to talk about it next week. Okay, but remember here, if I have, for example, in this process, I have also something that is manual. Okay, that I have to make myself. Let's put here a small hat, and then I put here in the hand a calculator. Okay, then this to perform Monte Carlo, this process or this function, okay, has to run two things automatically, okay, and fast. you will see, we will discuss it later, but if you here have a reservoir model, okay, let's say here you want to calculate the production profile, okay, and gives you something like that. And then you want to see, well, how porosity affects that production profile. But you can change the porosity. Let's say your reservoir simulator has 1,000,000 cells in the simulator, okay? And then if each run of the reservoir simulator takes, I don't know, 5 hours, and you have to run 8,000 iterations, you will never finish, okay? So see, it's a method that is very powerful, but it's brute force. I have to run many iterations, and it depends how, if it's automatic, I don't have any manual process inside, and also it has to run relatively fast. If I want to run 8,000 iterations, if each iteration runs 1 hour, then it will take 8,000 hours, okay, unless I can make it parallel. But just keep that in mind. So this method is the best we can think of, but you know, it's limited, so we try not to make it, only to include those variables that really we think have the most effect. All the others we try to use different methods. Okay, here going back to the decision trees, one comment that was very good from one of you, that you have to have, each one has a probability. Okay, in the decision here, not really. I decide. That's why it's a box. I decide one option, the other, or the other, and each one of them has the same. But these ones, they not. Okay, it might be 50% chance that is more expensive, and only 20% that is less expensive. Okay, and these numbers are going to change depending on my distribution I have. 0.3. Okay, and at the end, each option, if I multiply, for example, this branch times this branch, it will give me how much? 0.25, right? Yeah, not percent. No, it's 0.0. Yeah, 0.1. Okay, only 10% of occurrence. Okay, so you say also you're going to get here a value of NPV and a probability for that option. Okay, 0.02 for example, 0.03, and you're going to get an NPV. So it's not only to say I will choose this option, right? Because here in these variables I have no control. Capex I cannot decide. The number of reserves I have, I cannot decide. There's something that is just by chance. Okay, so the way I say, I usually use it to make a decision. I say, well, all of that branch, if I choose an FPSO, then I make the sum of the probability of each option and the NPV of each option. Okay, and that's going to give me a compound value of that branch, right? Is like a compound NPV for the FPSO. And then I do the same for the platform, for example, and then I do the same for the semi-sub. Okay, find a compound of the branch. Okay, and then I compare them. Okay, but it might be that, you know, this number gives you negative, so then it's not worth to make any decision anymore. You know that the compound is very likely that I'm going to get a negative NPV. I'm not going to get any, you know, revenue, any value back from that project. So I decide maybe to drop it. But that is the main target of the decision tree, is to help you decide and also to give you a compound NPV for one of the branches. Okay, and that you do by multiplying, finding the probability of each option, not only the value but the probability, and then calculating the compound. You're going to have to do that in one exercise. Then also something I was missing here, there is another type of plot that is commonly used. It's called the spider plot. Have you ever used it before? Spider plot. Okay, you make two axes, and this one is variation in NPV, and usually it's in percentage. Okay, so here you have the base NPV, okay, and here you have the variation in the variable, okay, or again in percentage. So for example, the oil price, if the oil price is 20% more, okay, maybe it will give you, of course it will give you a higher NPV, but it will give you, I don't know, 30% more NPV. Okay, so if, let's say this is oil price. Okay, or if you reduce the oil price, okay, by 20%, minus 20%, then you're going to reduce by some percentage the NPV, right? And you get this price. This is NPV for low oil price. And then you can draw a line through these 3 points, okay? And you can repeat that. That line will be for oil price, okay? For example, for capex, you will have the opposite, right? Capex will be more capex, will give you less NPV. So capex will be something like this. That's capex. And you can say, depending on how inclined it is, which parameter has the most effect on the NPV. You can recognize it very quickly, also with the tornado chart. Here you say, well, the production is very sensitive to how much I'm producing, and then the oil price. So you can also do the same with this spider plot. It's a bit slightly easier to make, but you have to make it everything relative to the base case. Okay, so the NPV, remember how we calculate relative, is the NPV of the case of NPV variation in percentage of a certain variable is the value of the value minus the value of the base case. Let's see if I have more space. The relative difference, right? I guess, just to clarify, I'm going to put it here. You have had some issues. Value of the base case divided by the value of the base case times 100. Okay, that will give you in percentage. Porosity, 30% variation, NPV, that's how you compute, and that's how you usually plot in the spider plot. You plot it not with values, but the variation in percentage from the base case, such that doesn't matter, because capex will have different units, will be in $1 million. The oil price will be in US dollars per barrel. Everything will have different units. So you make everything just in terms of percentage, relative difference. That clear? Yep.
Sorry, could you repeat how you assess from that spider plot?
First, how far away, because remember this is basically how inclined the line is. Okay, if it's here very abrupt, very inclined, then that means that a small change in that variable, let's say the oil price, will have a big effect on the NPV. Okay, so, but also for you, I'm not sure if you saw that before, the analysis, but probabilistic analysis, but keep it in mind also for your future professional life, okay? And also you can apply it in many other things. But usually we at the university, we are very occupied to tell you how is this function, how does it look like, to compute that function, to make models, etc. And then to make, if you have one input, what will be the output? In real life, it's not that simple. Okay, you have a variation of x, and then how do I compute this y? Okay, and you cannot fall into simple methods. You should think about. It could be also something very simple that, depending on the function, okay, just like a small side note. You say, well, if my function, I make an evaluation for the minimum, right, and the maximum, and I say, well, those are my boundaries, right? Nothing to worry about. But in reality, maybe your function looks something like that. Okay, let's say that that's stress in a pipe. Okay, for some reason the minimum and maximum, but the maximum stress is here. That means for a value, intermediate value of x, the pipe will fail. But your simplified analysis didn't capture that case, because you just run it for the smallest value and for the highest value. Okay, so keep that in mind, because it's useful not only in this course but also for other things in the future. Okay. Yes, I want to say something more, about, we were discussing about OPEX yesterday. So, as you well said, I got a question yesterday. OPEX has two parts. Okay, one of them is fixed with time. Okay, that not fixed with time, sorry, fixed with the rate, with the production rate. Okay, no matter if you're producing 100,000, 80,000, maybe you will have to always hire always pay the salary of the same number of engineers. You have to pay the same amount of insurance. Okay, you have some things that don't depend on rate, and then you have other things that are variable with the production rate. For example, what we were discussing yesterday, the amount of chemicals that you have to inject. Okay, maybe you have a big expense, how many chemicals that you have to inject, and if you have less rate, well, you have less chemicals. I recommend, if you are a bit curious about it, in the compendium, I think there is, let me check very quickly. I think it's someplace here. Okay, here you have, they call it fixed OPEX, and variable, the same name, fixed OPEX and variable OPEX. And they give you a way how you can estimate, but this method, really any method can work. But just keep that in mind. You have some OPEX, usually you have one part that is fixed and one part that changes. Okay. Okay, that's one thing that I wanted to comment. And also you have usually on top of the royalty and the tax, usually in gas transportation, and sometimes you use oil, and sometimes oil when you use a pipeline to transport oil. Sometimes one has to include it's called a pipeline tariff. Okay, and that has to do, I think I have a figure. So that's in this case, the gas transportation system from Norway to Europe. Not sure if it's big enough. Okay, but you have it's not too complex, but you have a bunch of flow lines that they collect from the different fields, they take it to a processing plant, and then from there they're sending further to places in Europe, in Germany, I think also some place here in Belgium, France. So to use that infrastructure, the company usually has to pay a tariff depending how much you want to transport. Okay, because that that system is the gas transportation system from Norway to the European Union, okay, or we could say now the UK, is managed by a company called Gasco. It's a company that is owned by the government, and they are in charge of maintenance. They are in charge of controlling the rates that you have in each branch. There is the distributing, the pressure drop, many different things. And if you, for example, have a field here, and you want to send that gas to the same line, then you will have to pay a tariff to use that system. Okay, and that also should be included in the expenses.
So is the company responsible for laying the pipelines as well?
It to tie into the existing infrastructure, yes. Except there is now another field that is not here. There is now another field that is located someplace here, and they will send a pipe because those pipes are already are over their capacity. These pipes, so they will send. It's called a field called Osta Hanstein. I'm not sure if my Norwegian pronunciation is the best, but Osta Hanstein. Okay, and it's a gas field. It's a spar, okay, which is a very, we are going to discuss it later, but it looks like a cylinder, okay, that has a platform on top, okay, and it's someplace there, and they will have to lie the pipe all the way to tie into, they want to send the production to Nyhavna. And in that case, Gasco, they feel like there will be some future fields in the neighborhood. Okay, so they are willing to come in and pay for part of the cost for that installation, because it's something that they, at the end, they're going to operate, and many future fields will come. But that, again, that comes just negotiation. Okay, you just have to, I have this finding, I want to make a pipe, are you interested? And then some discussion, and then they find a kind of a mutual agreement. Okay, but that's going, that pipe, I think it's called polar lead, is going to be operated by Gasco. And I think we have a guest coming from Gasco, right? One of the guest lectures. Okay, there was one last comment before we go to too many comments, missing comments. So just, you were also curious last class that we, to estimate cost, okay, or to calculate NPV, okay, companies usually have their own sheets, okay, based on their own experience. They have done, for example, Statoil, they have done many projects in the Norwegian continental shelf, so they have a big database of how much a platform costs, how much a pump costs, how much drilling a well costs, you know, what kind of completion. So they use that usually to get to calculate, to estimate cost and to calculate their NPV. One thing to note here is that these numbers, they change very much from year to year. So you have to be careful that if you use a database, it has to be updated. It's not, the question is not if it's good or not, if it's properly updated with the current prices. Okay, because they can change many things, you know, they can change dramatically from year to year. But you can use, it's called like internal utilities. By the companies, and this is usually based on previous projects. Or you can use, there are some commercial tools that you can use for that, and I will try to schedule a session. I don't think we will have time for you to learn it and use it, and it's also not the main focus of the course, but at least a demonstration to see how it looks like. Okay, because some of you will use it for your projects, so you get some feeling of how it looks like. And at least I know of two of them. One of them is called Questor. Okay, another one is a Norwegian company called Aces by a company called Acona. There is one more called that is by Siemens. It's like called Oil and Gas Management, I think. Oil and Gas Manager. Okay. But depends how it's started. You already have a database, you use it, you trust on it. But for example, a new company just starting, they don't have any information, they cannot buy it from Statoil, so they just use one of these commercial software. Okay, so let's now talk a bit. I just want to make clear now, the main purpose of this course is not go in detail in the economic calculations. Okay, for that you have a completely separate course, and if you are interested in that, you want to devote your life to petroleum economics, I really suggest you take the course of Trygve Strøm. How many of you are taking this course? None of you? One? Okay, so you can maybe correct me the things that I'm doing wrong, so we depend on you. Okay, petroleum is called economics, and my intention is don't go in detail into it, because then it will require much more time. What I want to show you is just the basis of the calculation. Maybe all of you maybe know a bit about it, and if they will be simplified, okay, because we don't have all the tools to make it more complex, but just that you get a feeling what we do. Then we put here for more detailed information. NPV calculations. Okay. But let's look first at how the cash flow. Okay, remember the cash flow is the revenue, income, and outcome of my project. Let's say that I'm, a company called NTNU. The cash flow in a petroleum development project and it's very simple. So here you have, in the y-axis you have the cash flow. Okay, that will be in US dollars. And like I discussed many times before, initially you have very big expenditure. Initially you just have acquired maybe some seismic, you are hiring a very small team of people that you have to pay salary, but then as time progresses, then you have to start paying for seismic you yourself, exploration, drilling, then you have to make the design, then you have to pay for the facilities, and then you start digging deeper and deeper yourself in the hole. Okay, and then after that you start getting finally some oxygen, that at some point you start production. Start of production. Okay, or I made all the expenditures. Not really here, okay, because we are still going to. When the production starts, usually I start making money right away. Okay, so it's already someplace here, but I have to pay upfront for the offshore structure. I have to pay for the separators. I have to pay for the subsea systems. Okay, and then they reach a point where it's zero. Okay, I have balancing, I'm getting some cash and my expenses are the same as has the yeah, that might be a bit confusing. Let's put that maybe here. And then you start getting positive cash flow, positive, and with time, remember the rate goes down, so that will go down again, down, 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 until maybe the operating expenditures are the same as the revenue I get from the field. Okay. This point, some people call it the point of maximum exposure. Okay, when I have the highest expenditure is usually when I'm drilling the wells and when I'm buying the facilities, okay, and the offshore structure. Yes, and the difference, so that's, it's very deep for an offshore, so let's call it here, that's for an offshore project. Okay, it's relatively deep because remember, offshore we have to build everything from the beginning. Okay, we have to put everything, because you have to produce someplace, so you have to put everything has to be in place before you start producing. For onshore, it might be a completely different picture. You have very low expenditure, you drill a few wells, you put some separators, you put something very close, and then you start making money very quickly. Okay, and then you start making, with that money you made, you start making drilling, you start expanding your facilities. So that's more or less the difference between onshore, okay, and offshore. The valley of death is is not so deep, and it's a much shorter. And here I think I have a nice figure detailing a bit what as onshore, offshore, we talked about that. And here you have, it's not very accurate, but it's that we have a negative cash flow. We have to build the platform, the facilities, the pipeline, the drilling, and there is, it says how you define operation, but usually there is something slightly wrong here, that OPEX we consider is just when you have production. Okay, so it should be not this part. Maybe we can use white, I don't know. Oh, we can use. Okay, and of course if you drill, maybe they say at the same time you start getting revenue. Well, it's really when you already have the first wells that you start getting revenue. So this part should be a bit shifted to the right, but at least it gives you what is what is causing this profile, what elements you have in the profile. Okay, and I have, I think, another one here. Okay, where you have the capex, you have, when you start producing, you have to pay the OPEX, and then you have the tax and the royalty. And for that, I want to say a very brief discussion on, because that's something that we need to make our NPV calculations. Okay, so I'm going to call it very short and very simplified. Okay, so don't take like a big class on it. So it's petroleum fiscal systems. And remember, in any other place in the world, usually the owner of the resources is the government. Okay, in almost any country, the owner of the mineral resources is the government. Okay, is the people, except a very big exception,
US.
our guys, Trump guys, except any American here? No? Except in onshore US, okay? Offshore United States of America. Offshore is government, but onshore is the person that owns the land. Okay, so keep that in mind. And we have two main systems. Okay, one of them is called royalty-based system. And the other one is called contractual system. Okay, so let's see very quickly, briefly, this royalty-based system is that basically you get a license. Okay, the company gets the mineral rights for a period of time. Okay, here in Norway I think it's 30 years. For example, in some other countries 10 years, so it depends. For a period of time they have full decision power on the development of the asset, and yeah, some countries, some examples are the UK, in France, Norway, of course, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, Colombia, Argentina. And the base is that I have to pay a royalty from the production, not on the revenue. Be careful. Doesn't matter if I produce, 1,000 barrels, I produce 100,000 barrels, I have to pay royalties, a percentage of that production I have to pay to the government. Okay, that's the first thing. Can I change page? So a royalty, that's the first thing. A royalty must be paid to the government.
Regardless of profit?
Regardless of profit. You might get some delay that you are going to pay it in the future, but regardless of profit, if you're making losses, you have to pay for what you produce.
But it's the local government, not the national government in some cases.
It depends. It might be split. Okay, you have some to the local, you have some, depends how it is organized. Okay, but that now we are going too much in detail into that. Okay, so you have total oil and gas sales. Okay, so that's, and then you have a big chunk of it. You calculate basically royalties on that, and in this case you sell it and then the government just takes the cash. Okay, it's not the government takes the production. You sell it and then the government takes the cash, but you pay the royalties based on that, and it can be a relatively high amount. And then you have what is called the net sales after you have calculated the royalties, and then you have to deduct, the first thing is the OPEX, okay, the operational expenditures. You are allowed to take them out from right away from there. And then you have other things that we are not going to discuss here in class, but you have depreciation, you have amortization that you paid to your loan. Okay, remember that you have a big loan, the company, to develop the field that you have to pay. You have, there was something else. Okay, and you might have some agreement on that, but that you do with the government, that you pay, like you have to pay dividends to your shareholders, or that you have to pay something due to the financing. So that's that, and I'm going to put it here on a question mark. It's not always the case, but you sometimes have it, that you pay dividends, okay, or financing to shareholders and the financing institutions, financial, and then you end up with something that we call the taxable income. And those are usually the only things you can deduct, and based on that number they take certain percentage, that is the tax. And like sorry, what's your name?
My name?
Yes.
Juan Manuel.
Juan Manuel. Like Juan Manuel mentioned, this might be split between country and regional tax. Sometimes you also have how you call it? What is the name for Fiscal? It's administrative region. Okay, you might have different levels of tax. And after that, you have the net income. That, remember, usually the company doesn't go alone in a project, but they are split 30. Statoil, even though they are the operator, they have the production license. Came Lundin or Eni, and they paid a share to help it to develop the field. So from there you start giving the money away. Okay, and I can give some numbers. I think for Norway, for example, at the end of this system, what you end up with is the company gets, the government gets 53%, and the company gets 47%. At least those are the numbers I have here.
Of production?
Of the total sales of the oil and gas. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is UK or Norway. I'm not sure. It's a big figure. Okay, well, it's already 11. Okay, but just be aware. Okay, that's not. We don't include usually these numbers in the estimation of NPV. Okay, we don't include for example, amortization, the shareholders, depreciation. This is just to calculate, because these are what we call deductibles. Okay, that's something that I deduct to the net sales to calculate the amount that I'm going to make the tax on. Okay, so at the end, usually this is what I include in the NPV calculation. These are only to get the base, to get, you know, how much tax I need to pay on it.
Excuse me.
Yes?
You mentioned the figures from Norway. We came across the taxation in the economics class, and we quoted like 23% company tax and 55% petroleum tax, making it 78%. Which is going to
Yeah, maybe I'm not sure about this number. But if you have your number, what did you say was it at the end?
We did it last week, and he said it's 78%, which the companies need to pay to the Norwegian government each 1st of April and October.
Okay, so we say here for Norway. You see, it's good to have someone to quality check what I'm saying. So it's 78%.
78 company tax, 23 petroleum tax.
And that has to be paid when? 1st of April?
Yeah.
And
1st of April and 1st of October. And payment is made in Norwegian kroner, irrespective of exchange rate.
okay.
So
Good.
they said usually on these dates, like if you want to buy dollars in Norway, it's very expensive.
Good to know. Okay, so yeah, just to make a summary, we talk about contractual system later, but basically there the government keeps control of how you're going to produce the field. They have a very strong input, and the company just acts really like a contractor. Okay, and then you get the share many times in production. They can decide what to do with their share of production, sell it, or they can keep it in a tanker, getting fat or whatever. But we are going to talk very briefly about it. But that's just to tell you, that you have to include royalties and you have to include tax in the NPV calculation. So just a very quick summary. Today we discussed the value chain. We said basically, well, not all factors are defined here in this very big model. And we have to account somehow what happens if one value has a variation or some other factors have discrete options. Okay? And I show you some options that we have. We can do sensitivity analysis. This is the simplest way, but it's also the less robust. Okay, it has some issues because you can see right away. But that's one of the most used options. Then you have decision trees. That is also, it captures a bit more the uncertainty. The problem is that the tree becomes very big. Okay, if you start splitting, you have many options. Let's say you have 10 options. Then you will have 3 to the power of 10 options to compute. How much is that? Big number, billion number, trillion number, I don't know. And then you have another option which is really the best. I want to get the same that I have in the input. I want to get a distribution for the output. The problem is I have to automate and I have to do it many times. Sometimes it takes 1,000, 8,000 iterations, and if I have manual process inside, is not so compatible. And then we talked about talking about the economy, how the cash flow looks like, and I wanted to do it today, but next class we will go very briefly how you make this NPV calculation that you will have to make in exercise 1 that you have already. Okay, so enjoy the rest of the week, and yes, we are in touch.